Hey, everybody, Dave Hagan here. Today, I want to talk about different ways to fund education. That's today on the Financial Wellness Podcast.
Welcome to the Financial Wellness Podcast, Dave's weekly message to keep you on your path to the financial success. Here is your host, financial problem solver and talk show host, Dave Hagan.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of the Financial Wellness Podcast. And we are coming to you today from beautiful downtown Van Nuys, Topanga, California, and San Diego. Hey, check it out. Back with us again. It's the Nickster. How you doing, Nick?
Dave, it is so good to be here.
Good to have you back 2 weeks in a row.
2 weeks in a row. But where is B. Reed?
B. Reed is in Chicago. He's got a business meeting there that he's attending. So he has not been with us for a couple of weeks now, but he'll be back. He'll be back. So he loves it too much.
So you're telling me he's scratching off those lotto tickets, huh?
I'm telling you, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? All right, everybody, let's get back to our 5 steps to financial freedom. Remember, we initially started with the 5 steps to financial freedom. And 2 weeks ago, I said, hey, once you get your ship on an even keel with those 5 steps, there are 3 other things that you want to consider. And we are going to talk about the second of those 3 things. But before we do that, let's go back and review the 5 steps to financial freedom. Step number 1, Nick.
Get rid of the cards.
Like it. Know the negative effects of those cards. Don't have any, or maybe one if you have to. Step number 2.
Know your flow.
Know what's coming in and out every month. Step number 3.
Eliminate debt.
3 different ways we talked about to do that. It's tough, it's difficult, but it's got to be done. Step number 4.
Create an emergency fund.
And we talked about the peace of mind and the sheer joy of doing this. Step number 5.
15% into savings.
Right. And we talked about doing this for retirement, but we're not using that word so much anymore because we want people to retire perhaps early. So we are calling it the time when you become financially independent. And then we said after that, do whatever you want, but have a plan. And now we are talking about 3 things that you may want to consider once you've accomplished those 5 steps to financial success. 3 things to look at on a go-forward basis. And last week, we talked about considering housing. Do you want to buy? Do you want to rent? What are the advantages and disadvantages of both? This week, we're going to talk about considering education. Now, all of our readers are probably thinking, our listeners, are going, but Dave, I'm educated. I got my education. Yeah, that's true. So maybe I'm talking about kids or potentially your kids somewhere down the line, or maybe your grandkids potentially somewhere down the line. Who knows? But why should we think about this? Well, first of all, student loan debt is out of control. We've talked about this. I saw a survey that looked at the class of 2019, and the survey showed that 69% of the college students took out student loans, and they graduated with an average debt of $29,000. In fact, we talked about the fact that there's more student loan debt in the country than there is credit card debt. It's very tough to pay as you go for an education, and thus we have all these loans. However, it's even crazier to borrow when you're going to school, and now people are using this money that they're borrowing not just for tuition, they're using it for housing, and they're using it for food. They're not really living like a student. They're living like a non-student. So what about starting now? What if you started saving now for your kids' education? And we've talked about this a couple times over the years, but what I want to do is talk about specifically a couple different ways to do it. So the first option, you can get into one of these situations where you pay up front and you essentially freeze the amount of the tuition. Then there's some schools that are doing that. But the problem is, one, it's not flexible, and two, you're not controlling the money. And what you're putting in, all you're doing is prepaying, and they are figuring out how much the money will grow potentially. And then they're charging you that lower discounted amount. So I'm not a big fan of that. Also, typically it's through a specific school. And I don't think you want to tell your kids what schools they have to go to, because if they're anything like my kids, you'll tell them the schools that they want to go to, and they will choose somewhere else.
Well, Dave, your kids did not choose law school, so they're very smart.
What can I say? Nick's feeling a little down these days because he's at that point of maximum indebtedness, and he's not making the money on that indebtedness yet. So he'll feel different next year, I hope. Right?
I prefer sassy.
Sassy. I like that. And Nick, I mean, if you want to be bummed out about something, I'll tell you what I've really been struggling this week. And I hope this doesn't bum you out too much, but I just saw a survey, and it said that for every hot dog you eat, it reduces the length of your lifespan by 35 minutes. I don't know if you.
Oh my goodness. Well, what about all the tacos I eat so close to the border here?
That could be a whole nother thing. But, I'm like anyone else. When I go to the stadium, I like my Dodger dog. And I don't know that I'm going to like my Dodger.
How about them Dodgers, huh?
They're doing good. I'm liking that. But 35 minutes. Now, the other side of the coin is the survey showed that if you eat a PB&J, peanut butter and jelly, it adds 35 minutes to your life. But you'll also have a lot of stuff stuck to the top of your mouth. So,
are you pulling my leg, Dave?
No, this is a for real survey. I saw this. Actually, I don't remember where I saw it, somewhere on the internet, but a for real, straight up survey, kind of bumming me out, because I do like a hot dog from time to time. I don't know, Nick, you've got me off on this whole tangent here. Let's get back to what we were talking about. Second thing that you could do to put together money ahead of time for a college education, you could just put money in the bank. Just put money in the bank. You're not going to get a great rate of return, so you could put the money in an investment account. You can get a little better return. It's very flexible. You're in control. It's a real easy thing. It's not committed to anybody. It's good, except you will pay the taxes on the increase in value when that money comes out. So in exchange for the flexibility and the control, you pick up some taxability on the increase in value. The third thing is the one that I really like, and those are called 529 plans. And what you do is you set up a separate account and you put money in over the years, and you put in your after-tax money, by the way. And there aren't limits on your income. In other words, if you make too much money, they don't make it so that you can't contribute to this account. Now, you can only put in an amount of money that would allow for a reasonable kind of education. So you can't put in like $500,000-$600,000, but you can put a reasonable amount of money in. And some states have restrictions, but for the most part, you put a reasonable amount of money in over a period of time, and you let it start to grow. And
Dave,
that money will grow.
Dave, let me interrupt. I'm so sorry. I just want to go back to, let's say I'm 18 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And, some of our listeners, they're 17, 18 years old,
right,
19 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say I want to put my money in an investment account.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, would you agree that the investment account doesn't even give you 1%?
1% return?
Yeah.
No, I mean, if you put money in an investment account and you put the money in some kind of ETF attached to the S&P 500, you're going to do 10, 12% a year. And that's part of where we're headed with this. That's the point. It's better than money in the bank. It's better than a tuition freeze, those kinds of things. You're putting the money away ahead of time and you're watching it grow. The thing I like about the 529 is it'll grow tax-free. And when the increased money comes out, it comes out tax-free as long as it's being used for educational purposes.
So you're telling me I can put money in this 529 account and then not get taxed when I pull the money out?
If you use it for educational.
Wow.
Yep.
I mean, sounds great.
You want me to blow your mind even a little further? You can even put it in a 529 for the benefit of your education. So you put the money in there. And if you decide somewhere in the future you want to go get another education, you can use that money for educationally related expenses. And the money that comes out and is used for that purpose is tax-free. So Nick, if this law thing doesn't work out, there's always room to get some training to be a pastry chef or something. And the money coming out of that would be tax-free. Now, if you don't use it for educational expenses, you pull it out and you pay tax on the increase in value. But frankly, you'd be doing that on a, money in the bank anyway. So it almost doesn't matter. Now, if you don't have any kids, can you change it to somebody else? Yeah, you can change it to almost anyone, like grandkids. So if you decide not to use it, fine. You put your kids in place. Great. If they don't go to the school and use it, and this can be for college, this can be for trade school, this can be almost for everything. In fact, they recently changed a lot of these plans so that you can pull out up to $10,000, I believe, a year for high school.
With no penalty? No penalty?
No tax coming out, used for educational expenses. So you are using the growth on that money to pay these educational expenses. This is huge. I'll throw another thing on top of this for you. But wait, there's more. And that more is in California, there is protection from creditors now for this money. Now, there's some limitations, but for the most part, there's protection from creditors. This money sitting in this 529 plan. Now, you can't have too large amount of money, because if the government comes in and says, well, you got $6 million in there and that's too much money for the education, of your kids or you or your kids, whatever, they might attack that until you tell them, no, I've got 16 kids and 32 grandkids. I don't know. But the point is, it's a great place to put aside money to pay for education. And it's great to be able to pay for that education in advance and let the money that's put in there grow tax free.
Now, Dave, let me ask you this. Does the bank or the institution that holds onto the money have to pay directly to the college, or is the parent able to take out the money, then pay?
Well, it seems to me that you would want to be able to take it out and send it directly to the institution, even if the brokerage house or the bank doesn't require that. You want to be able to assure or prove in the event of an audit that you were pretty tight on this, because this money can be used for a computer. Money can be used for a printer. It can be used for any one of a number of things, but you better be ready to show that it's directly related to educational expenses. It can be used for rent, but you better be prepared to show that it directly related to an education, because Sam wants his money, and this is a great set of rules. We just have to learn how to comply with it pretty particularly. So put this money in. Maybe you go to a brokerage house and you put it in an ETF, right? Maybe something connected to the Dow, maybe something connected to the S&P. It's going to grow 10%, 12%, 8%, something like that a year. But that's powerful interest. And you let the miracle of compound interest start to work for you now. So let me give you a couple of examples. Let's say, like you, Nick, you're out of school, you're going to start to make some money. You're not thinking about kids actively at this point. You might somewhere down the line, maybe you have kids in 3 years. Who knows? Let's use that as an example, although that might be a little aggressive for you. But let's say you put money in now and a child is born 3 years from now. And so when they turn 18, there's been 21 years that money's been building up. Well, let's take a look at this. 10,000 now would double and become 20, and 20 would go to 40, and 40 would go to 80 by the time the kid is ready to start school. That's 3 cycles. That's getting, that's only getting, 10%, 11%, something like that. But let's say you don't have $10,000 now just to drop down on a fictitious potential kid. What if you put in $100 a month for 21 years and got 10%? What do you think that would come out to? $395.
Almost 100%. No?
Yeah, well, $85,000. $85,000, $100 a month for 21 years. So by the time your kid's ready to go to school, you go, well, I got $85,000 if you go to school. Now, is that going to be enough to go to, some of the schools that are out there?
Dave, Dave, let's not talk about debt in schools, please.
Still feeling a little punky about that. We'll see how you feel next year. I'm looking forward to talking to you about that. Let's say you think 85,000 is not enough. Okay. Then put in $200 a month for 21 years. That's $160,000. That'll get you through even a graduate school kind of a situation. So I guess my point is, you see, education is generally cheaper, maybe even cheap, if you save up and pay for it ahead of time. It is so much cheaper if you don't have to pay tax on the growth of that money, and you can provide for the education of your kids or your grandkids. Or anyone else for that matter. But if you pay for it up front, you let the magic of compounding interest work for you. Now you're going to be able to pay or substantially pay for a kid's education, and they're not going to be part of this group that's walking out with these very difficult student loans. About a year ago, we were talking about paying for education. We said, wouldn't it be a great thing if when a couple had a baby shower, if instead of people brought stuff, people brought a check and it was put into an educational fund. Well, the way to do it would be a 529, obviously, and that would be the way to do it. The cool thing is that it's really pretty easy to set up. You can go to almost any brokerage house, maybe even a bank, I don't know, and they all have all types of 529 plans, and they can vary from state to state. But any brokerage house, you walk into a Schwab, into a Fidelity, into any of these places, Ameritrade, wherever, and say, I need a 529 plan. They'll give you the paperwork to set it up. You put the money in there. You invest the money how you see fit. Nothing high flying necessarily. Put it in something that's kind of boring, something that's going to just continue to slowly grow, and that interest is going to compound. And when it comes time for the kids to go to school, they're going to have all sorts of options, all sorts of ways to pay for that education. And if you decide that's not what you want to do, you take the money out and pay the tax on it, and you're just all that much better because you've had that money grow. But you're going to have to pay tax on it if you want to put it back in your pocket. So that might be something a little aggressive, a little early in the curve for a lot of our listeners, but certainly something to think about, especially in this age where education is getting so expensive. Next week, we're going to talk about the third thing to consider: philanthropy. Here we spend 4 years almost talking about how to accumulate money and how to make money work for you. And next week, we're going to talk about giving it all away. I know, but it'll make sense when you tune in next week. This is Dave Hagan, and you're listening to the Financial Wellness Podcast.
You've been listening to the Financial Wellness Podcast, Dave's weekly message to keep you on your path to financial success. If you have a question that you would like Dave to answer on the podcast, go to thefinancialwellnesspodcast.com. You can leave an audio message with one click of a button, or type your message into the question box. Either way, it's sent right to Dave's phone. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you receive the new episode notifications. Let's listen in now as Dave answers some emails.
All right, Nexter, hit me with that first email.
Yeah, so Dave, this is from Pete, and says, Dave, I'm trying to pay more attention to the financial market. Try to read financial periodicals, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, etc. I even listen to Jim Cramer. I love Jim Cramer, by the way.
I love
that's
Cramer
my
too.
that's my editorial.
Yeah.
Some experts say that the markets are due for a 10% correction. So, because of COVID, people are telling me that we're due for the largest economic boom since the 20s. Who's right?
How the hell would I know? Pete, I don't know. If I did, I'd bottle it and sell it. I mean, you listen to all these people, some are predicting gloom and doom, and some are predicting like this amazing economic expansion. I mean, how the hell would I know? In fact, if I knew, I wouldn't bottle it and sell it. I'd use that information to make myself extremely wealthy. I think the true answer is nobody knows. Everyone is speculating, or they're really speculating under the guise of their expert opinion based upon their so-called expertise. I mean, they're guessing now. Might be educated guessing, but I think they're guessing. So I really don't know. I can tell you what I do know. I do know it's damn near impossible to time the market. Everyone says, buy low, sell high. It's impossible to do that, especially with particularity. It's just not a way to approach any type of investing. That's why you need a long-term view. You need a long-term view of investing. I'll tell you, I had an interesting conversation with a friend of mine this week, and he's a pretty savvy investor and collector. And he says, Dave, after all these years, I finally figured out the secret to investing. And I thought, my God, this is going to be great. And he says, just go and put your money in the S&P 500. He says, if you look at the past 30, 40 years, certainly since 82, the S&P has returned on average 10, 12%. And he says, you don't need to know anything about it. You don't need to be sophisticated. You just go and put it into an ETF that models the S&P 500, which is a collection of 500 really strong stocks. And they periodically meet and drop some of the dogs out and bring in some of the high flyers. But if you have a stock portfolio that models the S&P 500, or if you have an ETF that follows the S&P 500 or models the S&P 500, you're in pretty good shape. And I thought, wow, that's pretty pithy advice.
Dave,
Yeah.
Are you telling me Tesla is a very good company to own?
Well, I kind of do. But it's got to be part of someone's larger investment strategy. You're not just going to go run out and buy a fistful of Tesla. If it's part of a larger plan, sure, it makes sense. The thing I like about this is anyone can do this. All you got to have is a little bit of time. All you got to do is walk into a brokerage house, set up the account, start putting the money in it. That's why we talk about it so much. The other thing that I know and hold very fervent in my heart is that it's important to diversify. And the Tesla question that you just brought up is a good example. No one should have all their money in Tesla. No one should have all their money in crypto, if at all. No one should have all their money in Apple, even though it's been like one of the best success stories the last 20 years. But it's important to have a diversified portfolio. And if you're following the S&P 500, you're diversified over 500 companies. Maybe you even want to be diversified more than that. And there's some funds that you can buy that are even more diversified. But it's important to be diversified. I was talking to a friend of mine, and again, another friend who's an investor, extremely successful over the years. And he was talking about this fund that he bought into. And he said, look, there's 1,000 different transactions that are part of this fund. And he said, I don't worry about any one transaction going bad. Because if one transaction out of 1,000 goes bad, that means I've just lost 1,000%. I've only lost a tiny little bit if it completely goes to zero, and not too many investments go completely to zero. So I think it's important to diversify. I think it's important to take a long-term view of investing. That I know. Who's right? Who's wrong? I don't know. But it's going to be really interesting to see what goes on. It's going to be interesting to see what goes on in other things as well. Real estate. I mean, look what real estate's done the last year. Seems to be holding, but man, you never know, right, Nick?
Dave, what is going on with real estate? I know, I don't know if it's part-time anymore or full-time, but I know that you're an agent, a broker, and I mean, it's hot. It's as hot as can be, right?
Oh, it's been great. It's been great. Yeah. I mean, the last bunch of months as a broker has just been fabulous. You put something on the market and people line up. I think it's a number of things. One, I think that interest rates are so low that people can pay more than they otherwise might have chosen to pay, just because the interest rates are low, so low too. I think there's a lot of people that didn't get affected by the COVID so much. They were getting government payments. They weren't having the monthly outflow. We talked about this during COVID series. They were going out and they weren't buying drinks or whatever, and this money started to build up. And now they've got money in their pocket. 3, I think there's a shortage of housing, on the low end and even to some extent on the upper end. And so I think when there's supply and demand, and supply goes down, demand goes up, and the price goes up. But it's been a crazy time, and I can't imagine that it can continue to go up or even be sustained. But it might. It just might.
So, Dave, let me ask you number 4.
Yeah.
If you had, let's just say, a couple $100,000 to put money in an investment property, where in the United States right now would you go?
Austin, Texas. Do you know why?
No, but I have a friend who's actually doing that right now. So I'm very interested.
The reason is Elon moved there.
Really?
Elon, my man. He had like 3 mansions here in the Los Angeles area, and someone was giving him some lip about, you're a rich guy, blah, 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 blah. So he sold it. He wasn't happy with California anyway, because they were, wanting him to close for COVID, et cetera, et cetera. And he sold it all. And he moved to Austin, Texas. In fact, that's where one of their spaceports is. So he's near the spaceport. It looks like SpaceX will stay, at least for the time being, in Southern California. The Tesla Design Center, which is located at the same place, is going to stay, at least for the time being. But Elon Musk moved to Austin, and there have been a number of other companies that have moved to Austin. And you got to think that when a lot of people are going there, that the property values are going up. Now, Elon didn't buy a mansion. You know what he's living in? Like one of these.
I think I heard of this. It's like a 300 square foot
pre-made house with his girlfriend and their child. And, she does songs and, da, 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 da. And I mean, he is really showing people that he's motivated by, creating these incredible things and doing these incredible things. And, I suppose, depending upon how much you buy into all this, moving humanity forward. But that's pretty interesting.
So Dave, let me ask you this, because I'm personally very not invested, but I want to be invested in real estate. Once I get out of the huge debt that I'm in, thanks to law school.
Right.
And what's so good about Texas compared to Florida, compared to anywhere else in the United States?
Well, 1, prices have been lower than here, so there's room for those property values to grow. 2, there's less, restrictions and interventions by government. People want to move there, and the more that people want to move there, the more there will be more demand, and the supply is going to stay pretty much the same unless they start building the heck out of the place. And property values are going to go up.
But what about Montana? I'm sure a lot of people want to move to Montana.
Well, true. I mean, Montana is incredible. I don't know if you've ever been up there, but that is really something. But Montana has some really, really cold months. Texas doesn't have those kinds of problems. Not problems, but those kinds of challenges. So, I think Montana is going to be going up in value. I think Idaho has become very popular. I remember when as a kid, everyone was running to Orange County and to the San Fernando Valley to get away from property values in Los Angeles. Well, now Orange County's full up. The Valley is full up. And so people are looking to move to other spots. So they're looking at Nevada. They're looking at, some of these other places, like I said, Idaho, Montana, I guess, to some extent. Utah has seen a lot of growth. And that's beautiful country, by the way. Oh, my goodness gracious. Who would have thought? But as population moves out, the property values go up.
And Dave, it's something I just thought of, but I think a good topic for next episode would be to buy property and to rent it out through Airbnb. And we can talk about the financials about.
Well, that's a huge thing to talk about. I'd love to talk about. I mean, a lot of places they're calling them STRs, short-term rentals. Apparently, it's extremely lucrative because the cost of marketing isn't nearly what it was. I mean, it used to be back in the day, you put an ad in the newspaper. Now it's right there on the internet. But property can generate a lot of income, the right kind of property, on a short-term rental basis. The problem is the neighborhood in which those places are located are being changed because they're going from residential where you say, hey, Phil, how you doing? As opposed to, somebody different every other weekend. So that's really created a problem in a lot of the resort communities, at least around in this area. But that would be a really interesting thing to talk about. That'd be great.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, everybody, that's a wrap. I think that's enough. We've talked about, the second thing to consider, which is education, the number 2 thing, and the final 3 things that we're going to think about being, housing, education, and philanthropy. We spent today talking about education, and we had a really interesting conversation, I think, about the market. Nick, thanks again for coming and hanging out.
Davey, it's always been a pleasure.
All right, everybody else out there listening, tune in next week. This is Dave Hagan, and you're listening to the Financial Wellness Podcast.
You've been listening to the Financial Wellness Podcast, Dave's weekly message to keep you on your path to financial success. If you have a question that you would like Dave to answer on the podcast, go to thefinancialwellnesspodcast.com. You can leave an audio message with one click of a button, or type your message into the question box. Either way, it's sent right to Dave's phone. Remember, Dave will randomly draw from the submitted questions and pick the winner of a free 1-hour personal conversation with Dave to help you achieve your financial goals. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you receive the new episode notifications, or share the podcast via the app with your family and friends. This is your announcer, Nick Appel, wishing you every financial success.